What if Order 66 made the clone stone on Palpatine as well? What would happen then? Let's find out. So in this alternate timeline, the deviation from the original timeline occurred during the very early stages of the clone army's creation on Kamino. In this timeline, Count Dooku realized that if he blindly followed Sidious, Sidious would eventually destroy him and take over the galaxy, unleashing more corruption than the Republic ever did. And to prevent this, in this timeline, Dooku decided to make some crucial changes to the clone inhibitor chips. So quick side note, in the original timeline as well, it was Dooku who provided the Kaminoans with the inhibitor chips, because after orchestrating the death of Cypher Diaz, Dooku took over the clone army project, presenting himself as another Jedi to the Kaminoans, who believed him without question. Anyways, point is, it was Dooku who made and provided the chips to the Kaminoans. So, coming back to the story, in this altered timeline, Dooku altered the Order 66 command within the inhibitor chips. While originally the order would have forced the clones to exterminate the Jedi, here the order called for the arrest and detainment of the Jedi officers. Dooku's decision to make this change stemmed from Dooku's belief in this timeline that while the Jedi had lost their way, they were not inherently corrupt. He came to believe that with proper leadership, his leadership, the Jedi Order could be restored to its former glory. However, Dooku did not hold the same belief about the Republic. He concluded that the Republic, along with Sidious, had to be destroyed to eradicate corruption from the galaxy. And so, to achieve all this, Dooku altered the chips, specifically Order 66. Also, in the original timeline, the chips contained information that caused the clones to recognize Darth Sidious as their ultimate authority after Order 66 was executed. However, in this timeline, Dooku reprogrammed the chips to ensure that he, Darth Tyrannus, would be recognized as a leader when the chips are activated. This change would allow him to take control of the army once Sidious executes 66. Thus, in this timeline, the clone army was created with these modified chips in their heads, becoming a ticking time bomb for the Republic and Palpatine. So following this, all other major events unfolded somewhat similarly to the original timeline. The events of Attack of the Clones still happened, Anakin lost his arm, and the events of the Clone Wars itself also unfolded somewhat similarly. And coming to the events of Revenge of the Sith, Dooku still went along with Palpatine's kidnapping stunt with Grievous, because he did not want Palpatine to become suspicious in any way. And also, like in the original timeline, Dooku was unaware that the kidnapping plot was actually meant for Sidious to eliminate Dooku. And consequently, in this timeline as well, Anakin ends up killing Dooku, and he dies without seeing his plans unfold. And after Dooku's death, events still followed somewhat of a similar trajectory to the original timeline. But here, Anakin's visions of Padme dying were a bit different. In the original timeline, he saw her die in childbirth, whereas here, he sees her die having been heavily injured. But still, despite this difference, Palpatine managed to use Anakin's fear of losing Padme to manipulate him to the dark side. And after having destroyed Mace Windu and the other Jedi and sending Anakin to destroy the Jedi Temple, Palpatine prepared to execute Order 66. And this was when things went horribly wrong for Palpatine. As Anakin left his office in the Republic Executive Building, Palpatine looked around at the state of his opulent office, which now bore the deep scars of the recent confrontation that had sealed the fate of the Jedi and the Republic. With a deep look of satisfaction and glee, Palpatine then approached his desk, and through a series of manipulations on his terminal, known as a holonet transceiver, he sent out a pre-recorded transmission of himself ordering the execution of Order 66 through his official comms channel. This transmission was directed at every single clone trooper in the galaxy. Having done that, the next task for the Dark Lord was to contact certain clone commanders directly to ensure that they got the message. This was because there were specific Jedi Palpatine wanted to make sure died no matter what. One such Jedi was Obi-Wan Kenobi, whose clone commander was Cody. And so Palpatine contacted Cody, instructing him to execute Order 66. As soon as he heard the order, the inhibitor chip embedded in his brain released a flood of electrical impulses, suppressing his free will and overriding his loyalty to the Jedi. Cody's eyes momentarily glazed over as the programming took hold. However, unlike the expected robotic compliance, Cody's tone shifted to one of aggression and menace as Palpatine saw it. Cody stared at the hologram of Palpatine for a brief moment before responding with, "Yes," in a tone laced with contempt and anger, instead of the expected respectfulness. And following this, Cody abruptly ended the communication. Meanwhile, on the other end, Palpatine was taken aback by Cody's reaction. He had expected the utmost respect from Cody, not the defiance and arrogance he had just received. And that was because Palpatine had previously tested the effectiveness of the chips on a few clones that Dooku had transported from Kamino to Sereno. When called to execute Order 66, these test clones obeyed without hesitation. However, what Palpatine did not know was that Dooku had manipulated the chips within these test clones to follow Palpatine's original designs for Order 66. Hence, Palpatine was now very surprised by this unexpected behavior from Cody. Anyways, following this, Palpatine felt an impending sense of doom, as if the wills of the clone troopers were aligning against him. Palpatine was very confused by this point. He had not sensed the destruction of the light side and the Jedi as he had hoped. Instead, all he sensed was incoming danger. Extending his senses, Palpatine sensed clone troopers approaching him in droves. And within moments of Sidious having sensed this, the Coruscant guard broke into Palpatine's office and started blasting. "Die, traitorous scum," one of them yelled. Caught off guard, Palpatine called upon the Force to halt the blaster bolts mid-air, but the clones slowly grew more aggressive, more of them joining in and shooting at Palpatine. Realizing he couldn't fight all of them and that he needed to escape, Palpatine saw that his only exit was the shattered window through which Mace Windu had just been ejected a short while prior. With no other choice, Palpatine leapt out the window, using the Force to glide his descent. The clones then rushed to the window, firing at him, but he quickly glided out of their sight, like a flying cockroach. As he descended, Palpatine, for a very short moment, took in the aesthetics of nighttime Coruscant. The sprawling cityscape was illuminated by countless neon lights, casting a vibrant glow over the metallic structures. Air traffic zoomed past in chaotic patterns, creating a mesmerizing tapestry of movement and light. The Coruscant wind howled around him as he maneuvered through the bustling traffic lanes, using the Force to guide his fall safely. Palpatine then noticed a speeder approaching his trajectory, and sensing an opportunity, Palpatine glided towards the speeder, landing on the erratic vehicle. Palpatine then opened the door and climbed inside, startling the speeder's occupants, which included a young Zabrak male who was clearly intoxicated, a droid with half its face missing, and an old woman who was holding a blaster pistol to the head of the pilot, which was a woman with short-trimmed hair and a cybernetic right arm. Noticing the form of Palpatine, the old woman screamed curses at him, mocking his appearance. "What in Criff's name are you, you wrinkled-up, panther-fodder goblin?" she shrieked, waving her blaster pistol erratically at Palpatine. In response to this, Palpatine raised his right arm, which corresponded with the woman's head, twisting 180 degrees, which also silenced her. The pilot, seeing this, muttered the following: "Thanks, goblin." Palpatine then used the Force to influence her mind, compelling her to pilot the speeder to Sector 943, also known as the Works. The Works was an abandoned industrial area in Coruscant, where Palpatine used to meet with Dooku in secret. And then, having forced the pilot to navigate to this sector, Palpatine moved to the back of the speeder. As he did so, Palpatine noticed the drug-addled Zabrak staring at his hands. For a brief moment, Palpatine was reminded of Maul, but he quickly dismissed the thought. And then, pulling out his comlink, Palpatine tried to contact Mas Amedda to understand what was happening. But when Amedda finally picked up, the sounds of battle echoed through the transmission. Blaster fire and explosions punctuated the background noise, and Palpatine could hear the panic cries of clones and officers alike. "Amedda, what is happening?" Palpatine demanded, his voice a mixture of frustration and fear. Amedda could only muster scared gibberish in response. "My lord, the clones, it's chaos," Amedda said. In the background, Palpatine again heard the clones shouting. This time, Palpatine could make out what one of the clones was yelling. "For Lord Tyrannus," the clone said. A deafening explosion then followed, and the comm went silent. Palpatine kept trying to speak with Mas Amedda, but he was only met by silence on the other end, until a clone picked up the comlink and said the following: "You traitor. We'll find you and stomp your wrinkled face into the ground." So due to his transmission to Mas Amedda, the clones now again know that Palpatine had not died from his fall. And Palpatine, enraged and horrified, deactivated the comlink. "Did someone just yell at me?" the Zabrak next to Palpatine said, thinking that the clone's abuse was directed at him, perhaps. Ignoring the Zabrak, Palpatine tried contacting the Security Council to get them to call off the order, but the connection did not go through. It was clear that they had also been compromised somehow. Palpatine wondered for a moment if Order 65 had somehow been executed, but that was impossible, Palpatine told himself. To execute the order, the approval of the majority of the Senate and that of the Security Council was necessary, both of which he controlled. So this wasn't that, Palpatine thought. It was still 66 that had been executed, but something had gone wrong. And then Palpatine's extremely intelligent mind raced as he realized that he had underestimated Dooku. Dooku had meddled with the chips, turning the clones against not just him, but the Republic as well, instead of killing the Jedi. As Palpatine saw the industrial sector of Coruscant, the works, approach, all he could do was scream internally, thinking of the betrayal. His overconfidence had failed him spectacularly. The speeder finally reached the works, a grim and desolate area, shrouded in smoke and illuminated by flickering lights of industrial machinery. Palpatine then had the pilot take the speeder to the Limerge building, a decrepit old structure that had once served as a clandestine meeting spot for him and Dooku. After landing, Palpatine passively influenced the pilot's mind to forget everything and leave, and she did so without question. Palpatine then looked out at the distant Senate district, the heart of his once unassailable power. He allowed himself to fully experience his failure. Within the span of an hour, he had gone from being the most powerful being in the galaxy to a hunted rat almost. While a good section of the clones began scouring Coruscant for Palpatine, the rest commenced carrying out the other parts of the modified Order 66, the destruction of the Republic government. And this involved eliminating all major Republic officials, including the likes of Masameda and also the Security Council. And so the clones stormed their offices with precision, leaving chaos and devastation in their wake. Explosions rocked the buildings, and the once orderly halls were now filled with smoke, debris, and the acrid scent of blaster fire. But the real fun began when the clones turned their attention to the Senate district, because destroying all aspects of the Republic government involved getting rid of the senators as well. Most of the senators at this time were in their official residences within the Senate district, and so the grand, lavish apartments that overlooked the bustling cityscape of Coruscant became the next targets of the clones. The clones marched through the hallways and corridors of these residential towers, their blasters ready. They broke through doors and stormed into luxurious living quarters, sparing no one. "Out of the way, you cowards," a clone barked as he gunned down a group of senators trying to barricade themselves in a room. In one residence, a senator attempted to reason with the clones. "Please, we're all on the same side," he pleaded. "Not anymore," a clone replied coldly before pulling the trigger, leaving the senator lifeless on his marble floor. The once majestic Senate district, adorned with intricate architecture and bustling with political activity, became a war zone. Columns toppled, holograms flickered and died, and the air became filled with blaster fire and the desperate cries for help. Some senators managed to escape off-world using their private security forces and personal ships, but most were not so lucky. And among those who tried to escape the chaos of Coruscant was Senator Padme Amidala of Naboo. So, to make sure that none of the senators got enough time to escape, the clones were being somewhat stealthy in eliminating the senators. But, luckily for Padme, a different senator found time to warn her. Padme was in her apartment discussing matters with her head of security, Governor Typho, when she received this warning. And so, as she was speaking with Typho, Padme's holocommunicator buzzed with an urgent message from Bail Organa. And when she answered, Bail immediately said the following: "Padme, you need to leave Coruscant, now." Bail's voice was filled with panic. "The clones, they have turned on the Republic. They're executing officials. You're not safe." Padme's heart pounded with fear. "What? Bail, what do you mean?" "Padme, there is no time to explain. You must leave Coruscant before it is too late. We are being surrounded as I speak. Padme, please go." "Bail, I can send help. We'll inform the Jedi," she said. "Padme, the Jedi have all been detained by the clones. They can't help. Please, you need to go now." At this point, Padme heard explosions going off on the other end, and the comlink went dead. Captain Typho, who had been listening, sprang into action. "We need to leave now, Senator," he said. He quickly coordinated with Padme's security detail, instructing them to prepare for immediate departure to Naboo. Padme, though confused and worried about Anakin, followed Typho's lead, moving swiftly through the corridors of her apartment. As she did so, the opulent surroundings, usually a symbol of peace and diplomacy, now felt like a cage closing in around her. As they reached the entrance to the hangar, the sounds of battle grew louder. Blaster fire echoed through the halls, accompanied by the shouts of clone troopers. The security detail quickly formed a protective ring around Padme and Raids, their faces set in grim determination. "We have to move fast," Typho said, his voice steady despite the chaos. And under Typho's lead, Padme and her associates soon made their way to the hangar. They then walked into the hangar, and the hangar doors closed behind them. But just as they were about to enter the ship, the hangar doors, which had been sealed, blasted open, with the clone troopers taking aim at Padme. Typho and the security team immediately returned fire, creating a momentary barrier between the clones and Padme. "Go!" "Get her out of here," Typho shouted, covering Padme as she and some of her associates made a dash for the ship. The battle was fierce, but the clones pouring into the building, determined to capture or kill everyone inside. Typho and the rest of the security detail fought valiantly, buying precious time for Padme and her associates to escape. Blaster bolts flew in every direction, lighting up the dim corridor with flashes of red and blue. As Padme reached the ship, she glanced back to see Typho and the others making their last stand. Tears filled her eyes, but she knew she had to keep moving. The hatch to the ship began to close just as a blaster bolt found its mark, striking Typho in the chest. He fell to the ground, his eyes meeting Padme's one last time as she stood sobbing. But then, just as the hatch to the ship was about to close, another blaster bolt found its mark. Not on Typho, but on Padme. It went through her chest, piercing her lung. The hatch then closed, and Padme collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The ship then took off, and soon entered hyperspace. So, quick side note, Coruscant did have a planetary shield, but that wasn't controlled entirely by the clones, so in this timeline, they would have some difficulty activating it. So that difficulty allowed Padme's ship to escape Coruscant without being trapped by the planetary shield. Inside the ship, Padme's aides quickly rushed her to the onboard medical facility. The atmosphere was frantic and filled with tension as they laid her on the examination table. A medical droid would examine Padme and said the following: "We are losing her. We need to operate quickly if we are to save the babies. The chance of Senator Amidala surviving is less than 20%. Padme's aides, of course, agreed with this, and the droid worked swiftly, and within minutes, the twins were brought into the world. The newborn's cries filled the small med bay. Padme, her strength fading, managed to look at her children briefly, and then her breaths became shallow, and her vision blurred. The medical droid did everything it could, but the injury was too severe, and the facilities on board Padme's ship not enough to sustain her, and so Padme succumbed to her wounds, just as Anakin had seen in this timeline. The ship, now carrying the newborn twins and the lifeless body of their mother, continued its path towards Naboo. The crew members were silent, each lost in their own thoughts as they processed the loss of their beloved senator. As for where Anakin was during this time, well, to explain that, we will have to go back to right after Anakin left Palpatine's office to rally the 501st. So as Anakin was leaving Palpatine's office, the only thing he was focused on was exterminating the Jedi so that Padme could be saved. And with that in mind, he marched forward. However, just as he began assembling the troops, the Order 66 transmission was sent out by Palpatine, and along with every other clone trooper in the galaxy, the clones of the 501st also received the order, following which their inhibitor chips activated, rewiring their directives. This happened as Anakin stood among them, and suddenly, as Anakin could sense and see with his eyes, the will of the clones changed, and they changed against him. The clones suddenly turned, raising their blasters and pointing them directly at Anakin. "Anakin Skywalker, you are under arrest," one of the clones announced, his voice cold and unyielding. Anakin's eyes widened in confusion and anger. "What are you doing, trooper? Lower your blasters," he commanded, his voice filled with authority and frustration. The clones, however, could not and did not comply. Instead, they tightened their grips on their weapons, and the tension in the air grew palpable. Anakin could sense their determination and the unnatural influence controlling them. "Stand down," Anakin shouted, igniting his lightsaber. The blue blade hummed to life, casting a glow on the clone trooper's armor. And then, without warning, the clone troopers opened fire, with stun blasts. Anakin deflected the initial volley with his lightsaber, his movements swift and precise. The corridor was filled with the flashes of blue energy bolts and the hum of his lightsaber as he expertly parried the attacks. But, despite his skill, Anakin was vastly outnumbered. The clones advanced relentlessly, their tactics coordinated and overwhelming. Anakin fought valiantly, but the sheer volume of stun blasts was too much. He managed to hold them off for a while, his frustration and confusion growing with each passing second. Finally, a well-aimed stun blast caught Anakin off guard, hitting him square in the chest. His body convulsed as the electrical charge coursed through him, and his lightsaber slipped from his grasp. More stun blasts then followed, and Anakin fell to his knees, his vision blurring and his strength waning, before ultimately losing consciousness. The clones moved in quickly, securing Anakin with binders and ensuring he could not escape. Anakin's last thoughts before losing consciousness were of Padme and the betrayal he felt at the hands of those he once commanded. And following his capture, Anakin, along with other captured Jedi on Coruscant, were detained and brought to the Republic Judiciary Central Detention Center. And that is where Anakin was when Padme met her end. And as for the other Jedi on Coruscant, those within the temple, well, the Jedi Temple was placed on lockdown when Mace Windu and the other Masters went to confront Palpatine. In the original timeline, this lockdown was lifted by Anakin, but in this timeline, that does not happen. So at this point, the clones would still be trying to get into the temple to arrest the Jedi inside. But without Anakin there to lift the lockdown, the clones would be having a very difficult time trying to get into the 25,000-year-old Jedi temple. And as for the Jedi spread across the galaxy, most of them were successfully arrested by the clones. On Utapau, Obi-Wan Kenobi was tricked when he received a distress call from Commander Cody. Obi-Wan went to help Cody, but was shocked when Cody and his troops pointed their blasters at him. Obi-Wan Kenobi, you are under arrest, Cody stated coldly, his eyes hardening as the chip's influence took over. Obi-Wan, confused and dismayed, tried to reason with Cody. Cody, what are you doing? What happened? He asked. But the clone's programming was unyielding, and they subdued Obi-Wan with stun blasts, taking him into custody. But with Master Yoda, things did not go so easily for the clones. So on Kashyyyk, Yoda sensed a disturbance in the Force as the clones turned against the Jedi. However, with the help of Chewbacca and Tarful, he managed to escape the ambush. The dense, humid jungles of Kashyyyk provided cover as Yoda fled, his small frame and agile movements allowing him to evade capture. Chewbacca, with his intimate knowledge of the terrain, guided Yoda to a hidden escape route. Yoda then got into a small ship and made his way back to Coruscant. This time without the help of Bail Organa, as in this timeline, Bail is dead by this point. Arriving on Coruscant, Yoda was greeted by a grim and chaotic scene. The once glorious cityscape of the Senate District was marred by explosions and blaster fire. The air was thick with smoke, and the streets were filled with the wreckage of the recent conflicts. The atmosphere was tense, with clones patrolling every corner, searching for any remaining senators or Jedi. Yoda, recognizing the futility of confronting the clone army head-on, decided instead to make his way back to the Jedi Temple. The temple, meanwhile, was under siege, with clones attempting to breach its defenses. But the lockdown initiated when Mace Windu and the other masters left to confront Palpatine was still holding, preventing the clones from gaining entry. But this also made it difficult for Yoda to make his way into the temple, at least through the main entrance. But luckily, there were hidden paths into the temple that only few were aware of. Side note, one such path is used by Jocasta Nu in the original timeline to enter the temple after Order 66, and it is that very same secret entrance that Yoda would use in this alternate timeline. And so, using his intimate knowledge of the city and the temple, Yoda navigated through the shadowy alleys and the back streets, avoiding clone patrols. He then reached a nondescript alleyway where the secret entrance to the temple was located, and using it, Yoda made his way back into the temple. Inside the temple, the atmosphere was one of turbulence. The once serene halls, filled with the light of knowledge and peace, were now fortified with makeshift barricades and defensive positions. The Jedi Knights and Padawans, led by masters like Shakti within the temple, prepared to defend their sanctuary against the impending assault. And upon entering the temple, Yoda soon joined them, and his presence brought a sense of calm and resolve to the beleaguered defenders. Shakti, standing near the central atrium, greeted Yoda with a respectful nod. "Master Yoda, it's good to see you," Shakti said, her voice steady but filled with underlying concern. Following this, Yoda returned the greeting, and the two went over the recent developments. Yoda was briefed about how, according to Skywalker, Palpatine was Sidious, and how all of this happened right after the Masters went to arrest Palpatine. And then Shakti would also explain to Yoda how Palpatine was also targeted by the clones, and that they have no clue what happened. But soon their discussions turned to the immediate matters at hand. "Defend the temple, we must," Yoda said. And then Yoda, along with Shakti and the other Jedi, strategized their defense. They knew the lockdown procedures were effective, but the clones were relentless, and the Jedi decided to use this time to try and save the younglings at least, to move them to a remote temple in the Outer Rim. And so that was the Jedi's immediate plan, to get the younglings to safety and defend the temple as best as they can. And so that is how things stood for the moment. And as for what happened after, well, many things. So in the days and weeks following the execution of Order 66, the galaxy was plunged into a state of unprecedented chaos. The clone troopers, loyal to their programmed chips, methodically executed the modified Order 66. The Coruscant Guard clones continued their relentless search for Palpatine, who remained in hiding, but their primary focus shifted to dismantling the Republic's government and purging its remnants. Within days, the clones had completed their systematic extermination of the senators, and those who had initially escaped Coruscant found no sanctuary, because the clones hunted them across the galaxy, executing them with ruthless efficiency. Even the remote systems and neutral territories could not provide lasting safety against the determined clone forces. On Naboo, the clones launched an invasion, believing that Padme Amidala was still alive, but quickly the clones confirmed Padme's death, following which they ended their short invasion, Meanwhile, on Coruscant, the clones raised the Separatist flag over the Senate building. The emblem of the Confederacy of Independent Systems fluttered in the polluted air of the city planet, a stark declaration that the Republic had been overthrown by an army that had now pledged their allegiance to Darth Tyrannus, or Count Dooku. The galaxy was in shock as the Republic, which had stood for over a millennia, crumbled under the weight of its own clone forces. Originally in this timeline, Count Dooku intended to lead the clone forces and establish a new order once Coruscant was secured. However, with Dooku being dead at this point, the control over the clone army and the Concord Republic fell to someone else. But it was not the Separatist leaders who took control, because Dooku had always viewed them as mere tools, useful idiots in his grand scheme. Therefore, control over the clone army did not fall to individuals like Nute Gunray or Poggle the Lesser. Instead, control of the clone forces and the newly conquered territories fell to the Separatist Senate. The Separatist Senate, a body composed of representatives from the various member systems of the Confederacy, was put into an unanticipated position of power at this point. The senators, initially pawns in Dooku's game, now found themselves at the helm of a galaxy-spanning revolution. The environment within the Separatist Senate was one of caution and optimism, mixed with uncertainty. They had achieved a significant victory through completely unexpected means, but the task of governing and stabilizing the galaxy lay ahead, and that would be difficult. Meanwhile, for all these weeks, the Jedi Temple's lockdown held firm. The clones, despite their best efforts, could not breach the defenses. But by this point, with the Republic having been conquered, the mission wasn't to arrest and detain Jedi. Instead, it was to tell them of their role in this new galaxy, a role which the Jedi Order could choose to accept or not accept and remain detained. So to do that, the clones broadcasted a message to all captured Jedi across the galaxy, as well as those within the temple on Coruscant. "You have lost your way," the message began, echoing through the temple and into the cells of the detained Jedi. "For years you have become too involved in politics, acting as an arm of the Senate rather than keepers of the peace. Your true role is to serve the people of the galaxy, not some government." The message continued, outlining a new proposal for the Jedi. "We, the Clone Army, have fulfilled our duty to eliminate the corruption within the Republic. Now we ask you to return to your roots. Serve the people once more as you were meant to. Lay down your arms against us, and we will restore you to your rightful place as guardians of peace, not soldiers." Across the galaxy, many Jedi, recognizing the truth in these words, agreed to this new mandate. Almost all of them had seen the effects of their entanglement in politics. Inside the temple, after having received this message, Master Yoda meditated deeply on the situation. With his vast knowledge and intelligence, he deduced that Dooku, Yoda's own former apprentice, had a hand in this plan. So side note, Yoda is able to make this connection because in Season 6 of the Clone Wars, the Jedi Council does come to find out that Count Dooku was involved in the creation of the Clone Army. And by this point in this altered timeline, Yoda would figure what Count Dooku had done. He had manipulated the clones to one day destroy the Republic, and take the Jedi back to their original roots, as Dooku believed. And having figured this, Yoda would call for a meeting of the remaining Jedi within the temple. The room was filled with tension and uncertainty, the flickering lights casting long shadows on the worried faces of the Jedi. Yoda, with his calm and resolute demeanor, addressed them. "Understand the situation. We must," Yoda began, his voice echoing in the silent chamber. "The Republic destroyed its spin. The architect of its destruction, Count Dooku, was." The Grand Master then went over how, with or without the Jedi, this new galaxy will move forward. He then went on to say that all things happen as the Force wills it, implying that they should accept the clones' mandate. "Propose the clones do that we become keepers of the peace and serve the people. But this decision, make it alone, I cannot. Put this up to a vote, we will." And so, all the Jedi present put this matter up to a vote, and in the end, most of them agreed to the way Yoda saw it, and the rest of the Jedi respected the rule of the majority. And so, because of this, Yoda immediately made an announcement on behalf of the Jedi Order that they accept the clones' proposal. And following Yoda's announcement, the siege of the temple ceased. The clones, respecting the agreement, withdrew their forces, and the individual Jedi who opposed the proposal were detained, but the majority who agreed to return to their roles as peacekeepers, they were freed. And soon enough, the tense and fortified temple began to return to a semblance of its former serenity, though the scars of the conflict were still visible. In the following weeks, an overseeing committee was established to monitor the Jedi Order, ensuring that they stayed true to their role and did not stray into political entanglements again. This committee, composed of representatives from various systems, worked closely with the Jedi, providing oversight. But despite the oversight, the Jedi Order was safe. They returned to their duties of maintaining peace and justice across the galaxy, and the House of the Temple once more echoed with the teachings of the Force, and the younglings resumed their training under the watchful eyes of their masters. The temple, though marked by recent events, stood as a beacon of hope and resilience. But for Anakin Skywalker, though, things were not so smooth. He had eventually found out in detainment that the clones had killed every senator they found, including Padme. This news sent Anakin into a blind rage. He almost tore the prison cell apart with the Force, his fury shaking the very foundations of the facility. It took multiple stun blasts to subdue him, and to keep everyone safe, he was kept in a medically induced coma afterwards. And then, as time went on further, the galaxy began to stabilize under the rule of the newly formed Independent Systems Alliance. On Coruscant, the clone and now droid forces patrolled the cities, maintaining order while the Separatist Senate consolidated its power on Coruscant. And the Jedi Order, though now operating under oversight, continued its mission of peacekeeping. And after all this, after the establishment of the Independent Systems Alliance, Obi-Wan Kenobi visited Anakin in his cell. A multitude of clones guarded the entrance to Anakin's cell, even though he was being kept in a coma. They knew how dangerous he was. And then, once Obi-Wan had entered the cell, Anakin was brought out of the coma by a droid so that he could talk to Obi-Wan. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the brightness. He saw Obi-Wan standing by his bedside. A look of deep concern etched on his face. "Anakin," Obi-Wan began softly, "I'm glad you're awake." Anakin's eyes, however, burned with anger. "Where is Padme?" he demanded. Obi-Wan took a deep breath and said the following. "Anakin, Padme is gone, like many others. She was lost during the chaos on Coruscant." Anakin's face contorted with rage and grief. "No, it can't be true," he said. I'll kill them all. Every last one of them. They will pay for this," Anakin said. And as he said this, Obi-Wan noticed the physical weakness disappearing from Anakin. Obi-Wan then stepped closer, his expression resolute but filled with sorrow. "Anakin, please, you must control your anger. There's more you need to know." "What else is there, Obi-Wan? Are you here to convince me to surrender to them, like the rest of the Jedi?" "I would rather die, Obi-Wan," Anakin said. Obi-Wan hesitated before speaking, choosing his words carefully. "Anakin, even though Padme died, her children did not. She had twins, a boy and a girl." Obi-Wan of course knew that Anakin was the father, and Anakin knew that Obi-Wan knew, although Obi-Wan did not directly say this. But hearing this, the anger in Anakin's eyes flickered, replaced by a momentary glimmer of hope and confusion, maybe. "Twins? Padme had twins?" he asked. Obi-Wan nodded. "Yes, Anakin, they are safe and on Naboo, but you need to calm down, and we can go see them, but only if you agree to not attack the clone forces." Hearing this, Anakin's rage returned, though a little less intense. "I will kill every clone I see if I'm let out of here, Obi-Wan. They murdered Padme. How can you ask me to spare them?" Obi-Wan then placed a hand on Anakin's shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. "Anakin, I know you're in pain, but vengeance will not bring Padme back. The clones did what they did because Count Dooku forced them to do it. They had no choice. You already killed Dooku, the one responsible for what happened to Padme. Think of your children, Anakin," Obi-Wan finally said. Anakin's eyes softened at the thought of his children, but his anger was still palpable. "I can't forget or forgive, Obi-Wan. They have to pay." Obi-Wan sighed, knowing this conversation was far from over. "I understand, Anakin, but think about what Padme would have wanted. I'll visit you soon, again, with Ahsoka next time. She's also here. For now, try to rest, and give yourself some time to think." And with that, Obi-Wan turned and left the room, leaving Anakin to grapple with his conflicting emotions. Obi-Wan walked down the dimly lit corridor, his mind heavy with the burden of his friend's suffering. He knew that the path ahead was fraught with challenges, but Obi-Wan was determined to help Anakin find a way back from the brink. And while Anakin grappled with this anguish and the galaxy adjusted to its new order, Palpatine was still hiding in the Lemur's building. Secluded in the shadows, he monitored the unfolding chaos through clandestine channels, allowing himself to fully experience the depth of his miserable failure. The once mighty Sith Lord was now the most wanted man in the galaxy. From his hideout, Palpatine watched as the clones systematically eliminated the remaining Republic officials and senators. Everyone who Palpatine had manipulated, everyone who aided him in gaining control, were now dead. And the Separatist Alliance, bolstered by both droid and clone armies at this point, firmly took control of Coruscant and beyond. The galaxy had slipped through his grasp, and every report of another senator's execution or another Republic stronghold falling only deepened Palpatine's despair. He did consider manipulating the Separatist leaders once more, thinking he could turn the tide back in his favor. But it soon became clear to Palpatine that the clones did not answer to the Separatist leaders. Instead, they answered to the Separatist Senate, over which Sidious had no hold. Dooku, it seemed, had anticipated his every move, ensuring no one could control the army he had reprogrammed apart from him and the Separatist Senate. The Sith's grand plan of revenge, crafted over a millennium, was crumbling before Palpatine's eyes. All due to his overconfidence and oversight. And then finally, realizing the futility of his situation, Palpatine knew he could not return to his life as Chancellor Palpatine. But Sidious could still survive. And despite this great failure, Sidious's spirit remained unbroken. He decided to retreat and regroup, to study the dark arts further, to find a path to reclaim his power. But to do that, Palpatine knew he had to leave Coruscant behind, and travel somewhere far. Somewhere he hadn't been in a long time. And so in the dead of night, Palpatine used a hidden ship stored within the Limmer's building. He flew the ship above the atmosphere of Coruscant, upon which he was met by the planetary shield, which the clones had activated to make sure that Palpatine did not escape Coruscant. But Palpatine's force powers were a mystery to the clones, and it was this mastery over the force that Palpatine used to influence the clone forces to let him pass through the planetary shield. This worked, and Palpatine was granted passage without suspicion, the wills of the clones bending to his command. And then, as Palpatine left Coruscant, the cityscape, a sprawling labyrinth of lights and towers, became a backdrop to his silent escape. His ship then entered hyperspace, and Palpatine's destination was set. This destination being Sojourn, the secret lair of Palpatine's master, Darth Plagueis. This desolate moon, shrouded in mystery, was where Plagueis had stored all his knowledge and conducted his dark experiments into the Force and the midichlorians. It was a place steeped in the dark side, a repository of forbidden lore that Sidious planned to use at this point to regain his power and his youth. As Palpatine's ship approached Sojourn, the environment shifted from the bustling chaos of Coruscant to the eerie silence of the moon. The landscape was barren, the air thick with the palpable sense of malevolence. Old but secure structures, remnants of Plagueis' dark legacy, loomed in the distance. Palpatine quickly landed the ship and stepped onto the moon's surface, the cold air biting against his skin. He then made his way to the hidden sanctuary, a fortress of knowledge and power. Inside, the walls were lined with ancient texts, Sith holocrons, and tools of Plagueis' dark experiments. And it was here that Palpatine would delve deeper into the secrets of the dark side, seeking a path to immortality that Plagueis had nearly achieved. This was the only path before Palpatine at this point. In the quiet solitude of Sojourn, Palpatine's mind was a storm of determination and rage. He would study the dark arts, uncover the hidden secrets of his master, and bide his time. With immortality, he would have all the time he needed to influence the galaxy once more. The revenge of the Sith was not over. It was merely delayed, Palpatine told himself. And so, Palpatine's story in Coruscant came to an end, but his quest for ultimate power continued. In the shadows of Sojourn, the Sith plotted his return, ready to rise again and reclaim the galaxy that had slipped through his fingers like sand. And so that is where the story ends, with Palpatine preparing on Sojourn, Anakin being detained in a prison, not sure what to do, the Jedi Order functioning again under the oversight of the Separatist Alliance, and a galaxy reborn. So what do you think would happen now? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And thank you to CJ Russell, Lord Newt, and Rufus Nelson IV for supporting the channel on Patreon. If you do want to support the channel, there should be a link in the description, I think. Also, if you're in the market for a t-shirt or something, I have some in the shop. Do check that out if you have the time, and goodbye. Have an awesome rest of the day, and may Master Yoda always be with you.